Most evenings in my apartment followed the same quiet pattern. I would come home from work, set my keys on the small wooden table beside the door, and sit down on the old couch that had been with me for nearly 6 years. It wasn't fancy. The fabric had faded in places, and one of the cushions dipped slightly in the middle. I had tried fixing it once with a folded towel underneath, but the towel eventually slipped out, and I just stopped bothering. Still, it was comfortable enough for someone who lived alone. My name is Leo, and my life had become very simple over the years. I worked at a small electronics repair shop about 15 minutes away from my apartment. Phones
Hey,
with
it's
cracked
okay. I'm
screens,
right here.
radios
I
that
know, it's
refused
just
to
so
turn
hard.
on,
We'll get through it together.
laptops that overheated for no reason. People brought them all to my counter. Some days were slow, and some days the shop was
These
so
eggs are
busy
perfect.
that I barely
Thanks.
had time to
Glad you
drink
like
my
them.
coffee
It's so
before.
peaceful here.
It went cold.
It is.
It wasn't exciting work, but it paid the bills and kept my mind busy. The nights, however, were different. Nights had a strange way of reminding you how quiet the world could feel when you lived by yourself. That evening had started, just like any other. I warmed up a bowl of soup in the microwave, the same brand I had probably bought a dozen times before, turned on the small lamp near the couch, and opened a book I had been slowly reading for weeks. Outside the window, the street was calm, old. Orange streetlights lit the sidewalk, and every now and then a car would pass by, its headlights briefly sliding across the walls of my apartment before disappearing again. Everything felt ordinary, until the knock came. It wasn't loud, just a soft, uncertain tap against the door. At first I thought I had imagined it. My building was old, built sometime in the late 1970s. And sometimes the pipes inside the walls made strange knocking sounds when the heating system turned on. I kept reading for a moment, trying to ignore it. Then the knock came again. This time, it was clearer, 3 hesitant taps. I frowned slightly and set the book down. No one ever visited me unexpectedly. Most of the people I knew would send a message or call first. I walked to the door slowly, wondering who it could possibly be. When I opened it, I didn't see anyone at first. Then I looked down. A young woman stood in the hallway. She looked exhausted. Her dark hair was slightly messy, like she had been walking outside for a long time. A small bag hung from her shoulder, and her hands were clasped tightly together, as if she wasn't even sure she should be standing there. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Her eyes met mine, and I noticed something immediately. Hesitation mixed with quiet desperation. "Sorry," she said softly. "I didn't mean to bother you." Her voice was gentle but shaky. I leaned slightly against the doorframe, trying to understand the situation. "Are you looking for someone?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I didn't know where else to go." Her words hung awkwardly in the hallway. Somewhere down the corridor, a door closed and footsteps echoed faintly before fading away. I felt a strange tension in my chest. Part of me wanted to close the door politely and return to my quiet evening. Letting strangers into your home wasn't exactly the smartest decision, but another part of me, the part that had always struggled to ignore someone in trouble, wouldn't let me do that. "What happened?" I asked. She looked down at the floor. "I missed the last bus," she said, "and the station closed about an hour ago. I've been walking for hours trying to figure out where I could stay for the night." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "I know this sounds strange. I just thought maybe someone might help." The hallway felt unusually silent. I studied her face carefully. She didn't look dangerous. She looked tired. Lost. The kind of lost that had nothing to do with directions. I glanced over my shoulder at the empty apartment behind me. One couch, a quiet room. A stranger at the door. My mind quickly listed all the reasons this was a bad idea. But then I imagined what it must feel like to wander around a city at night with nowhere safe to go. I stepped back from the door. "You can stay here, tonight," I said. Her head lifted instantly, surprise spreading across her face. "You! You mean that?" I nodded and gestured toward the living room. There's a couch. It's not luxurious, but it's comfortable enough. For a moment, she just stood there, as if she wasn't sure whether to believe me. Then she slowly walked inside. Thank you, she whispered. I closed the door behind her. Up close, she looked even more exhausted. The weight in her eyes suggested she had been carrying more than just a small bag. I'm Leo, I said. She hesitated before answering. Lena. I pointed toward the couch. You can put your bag there. She sat down carefully, almost like she was afraid the offer might disappear if she moved too quickly. I went to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. When I handed it to her, she accepted it with both hands. Thank you, she said again. You don't have to keep thanking me, I replied with a small smile. She took a few slow sips of water, then looked around the apartment. It was a simple place. A few shelves with old books, a small wooden table, and the couch she was sitting on. Her eyes eventually returned to me. There was curiosity in them now, and confusion. Can I ask you something? She said quietly. Sure. She studied my face for a long moment before speaking again. Why are you so kind? The question caught me off guard. I leaned against the wall thinking about it. Honestly, I had never really asked myself that before. I guess, I said slowly, because I know what it feels like when people aren't. She stared at me. Something in her expression suddenly changed. Her lips trembled slightly, and then, without warning, tears filled her eyes. She tried to look away, but it was too late. A single tear slipped down her cheek. I'm sorry, she whispered quickly, wiping her face. You don't need to apologize, I said gently. But she shook her head. You don't understand. Her voice cracked. For several seconds she said nothing. Then she covered her face with her hands and began to cry quietly. Not loud, dramatic crying, just soft, broken sobs. The kind that came from someone who had been holding everything inside for far too long. I didn't know her story. I didn't know where she had come from, but in that moment, standing in my quiet apartment, I realized something important. This girl hadn't just knocked on my door because she needed a place to sleep. She had knocked because she had nowhere else left to go, and somehow, our lives had just crossed paths. For a reason. For a while, the only sound in my apartment was Lena's quiet crying. I didn't interrupt her. Sometimes people didn't need advice or questions. Sometimes they just needed a moment where they didn't have to pretend they were okay. I sat down on the chair across from the couch and waited. The small clock on the wall ticked quietly, and somewhere outside a car passed by, its tires humming. Briefly on the empty road before the sound faded away. After a few minutes, her breathing slowly steadied. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater and looked embarrassed. I'm really sorry, she said softly. You've said that already, I replied gently. You don't have to apologize for feeling something. She let out a small, shaky laugh. I guess I'm just not used to someone being patient with me. There was something in the way she said it that made my chest feel heavy. Do you want to talk about it? I asked. She looked down at her hands again. For a moment I thought she might refuse. Then she nodded. Maybe a little. I stood up. Before that, you must be hungry. Her eyes widened slightly. I didn't mean to trouble you more. It's not trouble, I said, walking toward the kitchen. Trust me, making food for two people is more interesting than eating alone. That made her smile faintly. I checked the fridge. There wasn't much inside, just some eggs, bread, and a few vegetables I had bought 2 days earlier. But it was enough. A few minutes later, the quiet apartment filled with the soft, sizzling sound of a pan on the stove. The smell of butter and eggs slowly spread through the room. From the living room, Lena watched me carefully. You cook? She asked. Only the simple things, I answered. If you expect restaurant-level food, you might be disappointed. That's okay, she said. Simple is good. Soon we were sitting across from each other at the small wooden table, eating scrambled eggs and toast. It wasn't anything special, but Lena ate like someone who hadn't had a proper meal in a while. For the first time since she arrived, her shoulders seemed a little less tense. After finishing half her plate, she looked at me again. You really didn't have to do all this, I shrugged. Maybe I did. She tilted her head slightly. What do you mean? I leaned back in the chair. Helping someone makes the world feel a little less cold, I said. She studied me for a moment. You talk like someone who's been through something. I gave a small smile. Everyone has. That answer seemed to satisfy her for now. For a while, we ate in silence, but it wasn't the uncomfortable silence from earlier. It felt calmer, almost peaceful. Eventually, Lena spoke again. I left home 2 days ago. Her voice was quiet but steady. I didn't interrupt. My father, he wasn't a good man, she continued, and the place I was living in after that wasn't much better. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. I kept telling myself things would improve if I stayed patient. But they never did. She paused for a moment. One morning I woke up and realized something. If I didn't leave, my life would stay exactly the same forever. And you couldn't accept that, I said. She nodded. So I packed a small bag and left. Without a plan? She gave a weak smile. Not a very good one. Her honesty surprised me. Where were you going? I wasn't sure, she admitted. Just somewhere far enough away that I could start over. That sentence stayed in the air between us. Starting over. It sounded simple when you said it out loud. But I knew from experience that starting over was never easy. Do you regret leaving? I asked. She thought about it. Then she shook her head. Slowly. No. Even though her journey had clearly been difficult, there was determination in her voice. I think staying would have been worse. I nodded. I understand that. She looked curious. You do? For a moment, I hesitated. I didn't usually talk about my past with strangers, but Lena wasn't really a stranger anymore. Not after everything that had already happened tonight. I used to live with someone, I said quietly. Her eyes softened. Someone important? Yes. I glanced toward the window before continuing. We planned a whole future together. A small house, maybe a dog, ordinary things. What happened? She asked gently. I took a slow breath. She got sick. Lena's expression changed immediately. I'm sorry. Me too, I said. The words felt simple, but the memories behind them were complicated. For a long time after that, I continued, I stopped letting people get close to me. She listened carefully. Why? Because losing someone once was painful enough. Lena nodded slowly, understanding. But something changed, she said. I smiled faintly. Eventually, I realized that shutting people out didn't make the pain disappear. It just made life quieter. And lonely, she added softly. Yes. We sat there for a moment, both thinking about the strange paths our lives had taken. Then Lena spoke again. Tonight feels strange, she admitted. How so? Because I knocked on a stranger's door expecting to be turned away. She looked around the apartment. But instead, I found someone who understands what it feels like to start over. Her words were simple, but they carried weight. I wasn't sure what to say. So I just told the truth. I think sometimes people meet at the exact moment they're supposed to. She smiled at that. The tension that had filled the apartment earlier had almost completely disappeared. It felt like two lonely people had accidentally discovered they weren't as alone as they thought. After a while, Lena stood up. You should probably get some sleep, she said. You have work tomorrow, right? Yeah, I said with a small laugh. She walked back to the couch and picked up the blanket I had left there earlier. Before lying down, she looked at me again. Leo? Yeah? Thank you. Not just for the couch. I understood what she meant. You're welcome, Lena. She turned off the lamp beside the couch and settled under the blanket. Within minutes, her breathing became slow and steady. She had finally fallen asleep. I stayed awake a little longer, sitting quietly in the chair. The faint glow of the streetlight slipped through the window and stretched across the floor. My apartment didn't feel as empty as it usually did, and for the first time in a very long while, the silence didn't feel lonely. I woke up earlier than usual the next morning. For a moment, I didn't understand why. Then I remembered. Lena. The quiet apartment felt different somehow, as if the air itself had changed overnight. I sat up slowly and looked toward the living room. She was still asleep on the couch. The blanket had slipped slightly to the side, and one arm hung loosely over the edge of the cushion. Her face looked peaceful in a way it hadn't the night before. The tension in her expression had disappeared. It made me realize just how exhausted she must have been. I quietly stood up and walked into the kitchen, careful not to wake her. The floor creaked a little in the usual spots, but she didn't move. I began making breakfast. Nothing complicated, just toast and eggs again. The kettle clicked softly on the stove, and the familiar smell of warm bread slowly filled the small apartment. The simple routine felt strangely comforting. A few minutes later, I heard movement behind me. "Good morning." Her voice was soft and slightly sleepy. I turned around. Lena stood near the couch, rubbing her eyes gently. Her hair was messy from sleep, and she looked almost embarrassed, like she wasn't used to waking up in someone else's home. "I didn't mean to sleep that long," she said. "You needed it," I replied. She glanced at the clock on the wall. "I guess I did." I handed her a plate. "Breakfast?" She smiled, the first genuine, relaxed smile I had seen from her. "I think this might be the best morning I've had in a long time." We sat at the small table again. The soft morning light coming through the window made the apartment feel warmer than usual. Dust particles floated slowly in the sunlight, and somewhere outside a bus passed by with the low rumble of its engine. Lena ate slowly this time, no longer rushing through the meal. "So," I said, "what's your plan today?" She hesitated. "That's the problem," she admitted. "I don't really have one." Her fingers traced the edge of the plate absent-mindedly. "I thought I'd figure things out once I left, but everything feels uncertain." "That's normal," I said. "Starting over always feels uncertain." She looked at me thoughtfully. "You seem very calm about it." "That's because life has already surprised me enough times." She laughed softly. "That's one way to look at it." After we finished eating, Lena helped me clean the dishes. She insisted on it even though I told her she didn't need to. "I feel better doing something useful," she explained. I understood that feeling. When everything in life felt unstable, even small tasks could give you a sense of control. Once, the kitchen was clean. We stood awkwardly in the living room. The moment neither of us had mentioned was finally here. Lena picked up her bag from the couch. "I should probably go," she said quietly. The words felt heavier than I expected. I nodded. Slowly, "Yeah, you probably should." But neither of us moved right away. She looked around the apartment one last time. "It's strange," she said. "What is?" "Yesterday, this place was just a random door in a hallway." Her eyes met mine. "Now it feels like somewhere important." I didn't know how to respond to that, so I simply said, "You're always welcome here." She seemed surprised by that. "Even though you barely know me?" I shrugged. Sometimes knowing someone for a short time is enough. She studied my face carefully. "You really believe that, don't you?" "Yes." Lena walked toward the door slowly. Her hand touched the handle. Then she stopped. For a few seconds she didn't move at all. Finally she turned back toward me. "Leo? Yeah?" Her voice was uncertain again, but not in the same way as the night before. "What if I stayed in the city for a little while?" I blinked, slightly surprised. "You mean instead of leaving today?" She nodded. "I've been running. from place to place without thinking. Maybe it's time to slow down and figure things out properly. That sounds reasonable. She looked relieved. But I don't know anyone here, she admitted. I smiled a little. You know one person. Her eyes softened. Would it be strange if we spent the day together? She asked. The question caught me off guard, but not in a bad way. Strange, I said. Maybe. But I think strange things sometimes lead to good memories. That made her laugh. I like that answer. A few minutes later, we stepped outside the apartment building together. The morning streets were slowly coming to life. People walked past holding coffee cups, cars rolled through the intersections, and shop owners raised metal shutters in front of their stores. For Lena, everything seemed new. She looked around with quiet curiosity, as if the city held possibilities she hadn't noticed before. Where should we go? She asked. I know a small park nearby, I said. It's quiet. That sounds perfect. We walked side by side down the street. At first, our conversation was light, small things about the city, my repair shop, and the places she had visited before coming here. But the longer we talked, the easier everything felt. It was strange how natural it was to walk beside someone who had been a complete stranger less than 24 hours ago. When we reached the park, Lena stopped near. The entrance, Leo, yeah? She looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen since the night before. You changed something for me? I frowned slightly. What do you mean? Before yesterday, she said slowly, I thought the world was full of people who didn't care. She paused. But then I knocked on your door. Her eyes were bright now, but this time there were no tears. You reminded me that kindness still exists. I didn't know what to say to that, so I told her the truth again. You reminded me of something too. What? That life can still surprise me. She smiled warmly. For a moment, we simply stood there, looking at each other. Then Lena took a small step closer. I'm glad I knocked on your door, she said. Me too. Neither of us knew exactly what the future would look like, but as we walked deeper into the park together, I realized something important. One small decision, to open a door instead of closing it, had changed both of our lives. And sometimes, that was all it took for two lonely paths to finally cross.